Hell yeah, frontiers are always cool. And trust me, my galactic barrier is the coolest frontier. Sorry, had to do it. It was too easy, had to go there. Hello, interwebs, and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery Season 4, Episode 10, The Galactic Barrier. Yes, we are finally returning to the Galactic Barrier that I believe we have not seen since Star Trek V, The Final Frontier. I think we've gone past the galaxy a few times since then. Like, I think there was an episode of Next Generation, I think, where no man has gone before, breached the Galactic Barrier in TNG, or at least went past the Galactic Barrier, but I don't think we've ever actually seen the Galactic Barrier since that movie. Probably for very obvious reasons, considering the bad reputation of that movie. Though I still want Cybok in my Star Trek Discovery at some point. But regardless, that's an aside. It was very cool to see the Galactic Barrier back in this episode. But before we get to that, like I usually do, just a reminder, we'll be doing spoiler-free thoughts up front, and then we'll be getting into spoilers in the back. Like last episode, this episode feels more like it's a trying to get the characters from point A to point B in order to advance the larger story plot, but not necessarily doing anything big or revelatory within that. It's just basically a moving pieces along the board in order to continue this sort of season-long arc. And honestly, this is kind of where I get frustrated within most modern Star Trek seasons. By this point in the series, when we're starting to lead into the final sequence of events of the story, most of these sort of episode 8, 9, 10s tend to be just piece moving stories, like getting characters from here to there in order to just get us to what they eventually want to tell us in terms of the larger narrative, but they can't get to those big revelatory moments just yet. So this is mostly just our crew sort of getting from point A to point B in order to continue the mystery of the DMA and the sort of aliens that they're going to meet, and we don't really get much further along within that. That being said, I will say this episode works a little bit better for me than last episode because the episode takes this chance, with the plot not really progressing forward in any huge demonstrable way, to go back and slow down and give us the backstory of one of our major characters that we met this season, namely Tarka. There's a lot of talk in the past few episodes of Tarka's backstory, sort of made allusions and references to it, but we actually haven't gotten to see it yet. And I think, and honestly, this was a truly standout episode for Tarka because while it's only a few scenes here or there, it really did wonders for fleshing out this character who I'm really thinking is being built up to be the major antagonist of this season in the final few episodes, but really humanizing him in a truly wonderful way. And I honestly will say that his scenes in this episode are honestly some of the most heart-wrenching and kind of beautiful scenes, and ultimately just tear at your heartstrings quite a bit. They're nothing particularly new or crazy, but the actor just performs them so warmly and so sweetly that you really believe that this is the reason why he's going to do all these things that he's been trying to do this season so far. So I really just loved this exploration of Tarka's character within this that, again, didn't knock my socks off, but I think really humanized a character that desperately needing it, considering how much he is playing a defining role within these probably next few episodes of the season. Beyond that, though, we do get a little bit more of the relationship between Burnham and the Federation president, showcasing how their relationship has evolved since the beginning of the season. I mean, obviously, at the beginning of the season, they were very much at each other's throats a little bit towards the beginning, and you can see that there's a little bit more trust has grown between these two, and there's a much stronger working relationship, though still some things that need to be ironed out, and this episode tends to work towards that. Again, nothing pretty revelatory in my opinion, but does a solid job all around on that front. But my last thing I will say is one of the sweetest things, again, is we get more of Saru's romantic life in this, and it was just truly adorable. Saru is just the awkward, adorable man after my own heart, and I just oh, Saru, you're so sweet and just so shy, and it's wonderful. And I loved all the ways that Doug Jones was playing Saru in these. I think he's doing a wonderful job developing this character's shyness and adorableness. So to wrap up my spoiler-free thoughts, again, like last episode, this was just moving the plot forward and didn't really do anything super crazy, but I did like this one a lot more than last episode, mostly because it does do a lot more for our characters and really pushing them forward and humanizing them in a way that we hadn't really gotten so far. So a step up from last episode, but not a huge step forward, though still a solid episode overall that I enjoyed, but we'll ultimately kind of probably forget in the larger, look back at the season. That being said, though, let's dive into spoilers. So our first scene is actually probably one of my favorite scenes of the episode, where we basically have the sort of meeting of the minds of task force to figure out how to meet the DMCA aliens. And I love like the different conversations here, like Kovich being like, you don't want to have confirmation bias. Why do we think that these aliens will speak in the exact same way? Sort of relating it to the universal translator and the problems of bias within that. I thought that was wonderful. Also in this scene, we got the actor Hiro Kanagawa, who, apologies if I said his name wrong, but he's an actor that you just love to see. If you have not heard of him, he is an actor who, if you throw a dart at like a list of science fiction TV shows that have come out over the last 10-20 years, you will probably land on a show that he has appeared in. I mean, like Stargate, X-Files, Caprica, Heroes, like just he's been in like all these random science fiction shows, and he always does a great job, but he never gets like a front and center starring role. So it's just nice to see him crop up here. He does a great job every single time that you see him, and I always enjoy him. So it was just cool to see him pop up here. Also in this sequence, I think Kovich makes a Gilligan's Islands reference, like a 3-hour tour reference, was like, wow, these man's really digging into his early Federation and Earth pop culture to get that reference. But that was all kind of fun, and so this sequence was a good time. Then after that, we get a sequence where the Federation president and Vance and Burnham sort of make a plan to go to the Galactic Barrier, saying that they're going to have to get ready in about 2 hours or so. And then the Federation president says, like, look, I am the best negotiator. We don't have people ready right now. So in order to get out of here really quickly, I'm going to resign my commission as president. Vance's like, you can't do that. And she says, I'm going to. And I like that. I actually really enjoyed it because it shows the desperate need of the situation that, like, we got to go. We got to get out of here. We don't have time to wait for anything. And we got to use the people on hand. And because I'm the best person, I'm willing to do that. And it also shows the Federation president being a fairly selfless and good person. As I've said throughout this entire season so far, I've liked that the Federation president has been sometimes an antagonist, sometimes a friend to our main characters, but always like being one of the more interestingly written politicians, and that continues with sequences like this. So I really enjoyed that. Now, technically, at this moment, we get a scene with Tarka and Book, but I'll talk about them separately at the end of this review, so I'm just going to continue with the Discovery storyline. But basically, we have Adira coming back on the ship after having dropped Gray off at Trill, and it was nice to see Adira back, kind of like Tilly. I've been kind of missing both Adira and Tilly as characters this season so far. They haven't been in the past, like, 4 or 5 episodes, so it was nice to see Adira come back here, and I did like, again, we get a little moment with Stamets being a parent and, like, trying to over-parent and, like, try to see that, oh, Adira's upset that Gray's no longer there. I actually worried for a second that they had broken up in the off-screen sequences, but I'm glad that didn't turn out to be the case. But I like that, you know, Stamets was trying to be overbearing and was overly concerned and trying to be, you know, complimentary and say like, oh, we need to get you working to sort of distract you, that sort of thing. And I did like how that did come back around at the end of the episode, where he sort of says like, look, you know, I'm sorry that I was overbearing, and Adira saying like, I know this is different, but it's still good. I mean, I get to like tell Gray about what I get to go through later on, so it's long distance relationships are difficult, but we're figuring it out, and I enjoyed that. And I did like Stamets saying like, look, my dad never cared for me, so I'm always going to reach for you when I think you're in pain, because I want to sort of overcompensate. And I thought that was very endearing and a very sweet little moment, again building up that queer found family that this show has been so excellent about displaying and building, and I absolutely love it. But moving beyond that storyline, though, we also get the Federation president Burnham butting heads again, but I think we sort of had some learning from Burnham from last episode, where remember where Culber says, you know, when you have people disagreeing, try to meet somewhere where you can find compromise and build from there. And so we get this sort of same thing here with Burnham and the Federation president, where Burnham says, you know, I'll take over my ship if you allow me to like run the ship, but you are in control of doing all the negotiations and diplomacy sort of stuff, and sort of that clear delineation of roles and compromising there I thought was really wonderful. But then they jump to the Galactic Barrier a few minutes away from it, and they get a surprise message from Admiral Vance, who tells them that the DMA has teleported right near Earth and Navarre. So really upping the stakes for our characters in these last final episodes of the season, really saying like, if you don't figure this out, both Earth and Navarre quite possibly could be destroyed. So I like that. It's like, okay, now the stakes is not just this nebulous like, oh, planets are being destroyed. It's like, no, now Earth and Vulcan very much are on the table for being destroyed. And we know from Star Trek 2009 that destroying Vulcan, or even destroying Romulus, as we saw in that movie and into Star Trek Picard, that, it's quite possible that this show could destroy them. So we'll see how that ultimately goes. But it does create a conflict between Burnham and the Federation president, because the Federation president does not want to reveal to the crew because they need to stay focused, where Burnham wants to reveal to them. And this is one where I actually kind of see both sides of this, where it's like you want to be open with your crew, but you want them to remain on task. I don't know. Honestly, I'm glad I'm not a person in that situation, because there's an element to me that's like, no, I think you don't tell them at this point. You need to like have them stay focused. But I was like, no, you ethically do kind of, they deserve to know what's at stake here, but you don't want them to get too distracted. So I honestly see both sides of the debate, and I actually don't know what I would choose in that situation. I would probably side with Burnham, but I actually am not 100% certain on that. So good on the show for coming up with a really interesting sort of conflict for these two characters to sort of go through. But ultimately, we have the crew trying to go through the Galactic Barrier. Frustratingly, this is something that happened in the 23rd century, and yet way back in Star Trek V, and yet it's apparently still very difficult today, despite the fact that Cybok, of all people, figured out how to do it. But regardless, I do like the way they displayed the Galactic Barrier. It was this very cool looking thing. Like the visual effects were just awesome on it. I also really like conceptually how they had it. Was like these like cell membranes that the Discovery had to like sort of pop into in order to try to travel across the Galactic Barrier to protect themselves. And eventually they have to like sort of hop between the different cell membranes in order to get across. I thought that was just a really cool, like very weird Star Trekian concept. People always complain about like Star Trek having weird space stuff, like the space orchids at the end of Star Trek Picard season 1 being the biggest touchstone. But I love that stuff. Like the weirder the better, in my opinion, with Star Trek space stuff. I mean, you have space jellyfish from like Encounter at Farpoint, the space orchids, like just give me weird nonsense space stuff. I'm always here for it, and I enjoyed it here. Again, it didn't really create a huge worry for me. Like I knew this was just sort of like the threat of the week sort of situation for them, that just get these characters to have some sort of action beat here. It didn't necessarily knock my socks off, but it was fun for what it was. The only thing I will say in this sequence is we do get a moment where all the characters are really worried and they're like, we'll get back to Earth, and they have this like mentioning of all the things they love about Earth, which felt very, very forced to me to like really hammer home the conflict between Burnham and the Federation president. You see these moments a few times in Discovery. I think it happened last week too with the argument between our two sort of pilot characters, Reese and Bryce. Back in that episode, but here again, it's just these moments where you can clearly tell that this argument between these bridge crew members is only there to service the like problem between our main characters, the sort of fight between telling them about Earth or not. And it's just like, oh, this conversation does not feel natural because I know that it's in service of telling this larger story, and it felt a bit forced. And so I keep having this frustration with Discovery when it does scenes like this, where it just like has these kind of forced conversations that are clearly there to bring home the theme, as opposed to feeling like something that would naturally happen within the plot. It's not something that overly destroys or distracts from the plot. It's just sort of like, I really feel you forcing this one to make this point. It doesn't ruin the overall feeling, but just like little conversations like this, like you didn't need it. You didn't need it, and I felt like it took me out of the sequence. But the crew gets across the Galactic Barrier, and Burnham and the Federation president have a heart-to-heart, and the Federation president decides to reveal to the crew that the Earth is in danger, and then they all move forward, and they head towards the Galactic Barrier aliens, and there's a planet outside of their area that they're going to stop at to see if they can find out any information. So, a decently well-done action plot there, nothing particularly special in my opinion, but it did move forward the relationship between Burnham and the Federation president in a nice little way, and gave us a fun little action sequence, if nothing particularly special. But this does move us over to the more intriguing part of this story, which is Tarka and Book going to the old prison that Tarka was held at with the Emerald Chain, in order to get some programmable antimatter to cross the Galactic Barrier themselves. But this gives us a chance for Tarka to sort of reveal to Book some of his backstory and give us some specifics. Now, I've been talking about this whole season, like, we got this weird backstory for Tarka, I think like 3 or 4 episodes ago, about him having a lover who went to another universe, and I kept speculating, like, ooh, is this someone that was going to be like some big member, like maybe Lorca, maybe an alternate version of Tarka, and, you know, that just sort of happens when you get into these things where, like, when shows sort of, like, leave these little breadcrumbs. Like, that's super weird and specific. I feel like that's got to be leading to some big reveal. But ultimately, I do really like this storyline where we basically just get to see the backstory of Tarka kind of falling in love with this fellow prisoner in the Emerald Chain. And I loved the small developments that you see over the course of this story. Oros, who's the other scientist's name, I love how he starts off being like, I don't want to know you. I don't want to get to hear you because I know what it's like to lose someone here. You sort of get this hint of like, people have died here and he doesn't want to lose another person. And Tarka just, and them becoming closer and closer through their like weird scientist stuff, like naming the golden the digits in like the golden ratio and things like that, and you can sense them nerding out together. And the fact that they are prisoners together, they start to bond and fall in love together. And I thought that was very endearingly sweet. And I thought the moment that really hit that home for me was when Oros had a panic attack because of the siren going off. And the last time the siren went off, the person that he was with got murdered, presumably in front of him. And Tarka, caring for him in those moments, it was very tender and very sweet and felt very true. I mean, it's one of those, like, triggers happen when you, like, hear a sound or, like, a loud noise for some people with certain types of PTSD that just sets you off because it reminds you of these very traumatic events that can happen. And so Tarka just being there for him was, felt very real. It felt very sweet, and yet also showed that Tarka is a very caring man when he wants to be. I mean, throughout the entire last few episodes of the season, I've talked about Tarka being a very selfish man and a very self-centered man. And I still think that is the case. I do think he is someone who is very self-centered. But you start to understand more his drive to be with this person. I think that ultimately it ends up being incredibly endearing at the end, where it's revealed that Tarka sort of was having his own plan to try and escape, and it ultimately gets Oros shot, and Tarka is able to free them both, but Oros can't escape because he's too badly hurt. And I really love the moment where Oros forgives him and says, look, I get it. We all want to escape. I would do anything too, and I know you want to save me, but you have to escape yourself. I cannot make it out right now. And Tarka having to leave him behind and feeling guilty for that. And the it's not really Tarka's fault, but I understand why he would feel guilt at having left him behind. And also we also get revealed that Oros was building this sort of like bridge to another universe, that sort of thing. It is a bit of a stretch to like, oh, we need to like, it's this whole like backstory. I know that it's just there mostly to have a reason for Tarka to want to get this power source from these aliens. So I get it that it's like weird, but it's just a very weirdly specific thing. Like, oh, there's this alternate universe that is apparently my alien's heaven or whatever. It just felt very, very weird in terms of a backstory and oddly specific. But that being said, I think the emotional core of this whole sequence was very sweet. And I love Book sort of coming around during this whole sequence, because he starts off very angry at Tarka having brought him to this prison and not trusting him. But then eventually over the course of the episode, hearing his backstory, eventually understanding where Tarka was coming from. And it just was super engaging and wonderful and ultimately great. And so that's kind of where I'll end my thoughts on this episode. I think this was a very, again, standard by the numbers, moving the plot forward episode on the whole, but I think this one gets a little bit more pluses in my book because of the very heartwarming and effectively done and acted backstory for Tarka that I think was absolutely just really wonderful in my opinion, and I think did wonders to really humanize a character who I found intriguing so far, but finally giving him a little bit more to hook into as a fully fleshed out character, and I think it worked really, really well. So that's my thoughts on this episode. A strong one, but not a great one overall, but I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Did you like this episode or did you not? I'd love to hear all of that. Also, don't forget, we do have another episode of Star Trek Discovery next week, but next week is also the premiere of Star Trek Picard Season 2, so Jessie's got a lot of reviewing to do in the near future, but I'm very excited for that as well, so be on the lookout not only for my Discovery review, but my Picard Season 2 premiere review as well. But beyond all of that, thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you, as always, live long and prosper, my friends.